I am Lissa Joseph, and this morning, Thursday, March 10, 2022, we're just moments away from the commencement of this morning's sitting of the Senate. We will be seeing a number of papers being laid by the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, Investment, Creative Industries, Culture and Information. He's also the leader of government business, Honorable Gideon Ferdinand. The Senate is also going to consider a number of bills: the Supplementary Appropriation, Domestic Violence, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Agreement Amendment, the Customs Control and Management Agreement, Community Tourism Development, Agriculture and Fisheries Incentives Amendment. And it is the intention of the Honorable Leader of Government Business to seek leave of the Senate to enable these bills to go through all their stages at this sitting. Certainly, arguably, the two bills that will be drawing much discussion in the Senate today would be the Domestic Violence Bill as well as the Community Tourism Development Bill. To let you know that for the supplementary appropriation, it is in the supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2021-2022. It is in the sum of $9,870,400, and it is a charge against the Consolidated Fund and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. In the lower house, the House of Assembly, on Tuesday, March 8, we did hear from the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, that the supplementary appropriation bill is really to be able to cover the expenses that were incurred coming out of Hurricane Elsa, which struck us as a Category 1, a hurricane in July of 2021, and other associated expenditures unforeseen by the state. And certainly in the response package for Hurricane Elsa, it is valued at $10 million. And the breakdown for that response package, the agriculture sector deserving of $5 million to cover all of the crop damage and other damage sustained by farmers, livestock farmers as well. The Ministry or Department of Infrastructure receiving $1 million in order to facilitate the cleanup of the communities and the roadways. The Ministry of or Department of Equity, Social Justice and Empowerment receiving $3 million, and of course that is to respond to the social needs of those affected by the storm. And the Department of Housing receiving $1 million to assist those whose homes sustained damage as a result of Hurricane Elsa. So that's the breakdown there, covering the supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2021-2022. And as I indicated, the domestic violence bill will be one drawing much discussion in the Senate today, as we had seen in the lower house on Tuesday, which incidentally was celebrated International Women's Day. This bill being heralded as an historic one for St. Lucia, as a bill that is, when enacted, will be the most progressive piece of legislation addressing that scourge of domestic violence. And the minister in the lower house, Minister of Responsibility for Gender Affairs, Honorable Dr. Virginia Albert Poyot, told the lower house that annually the police receives in some 250 reports of sexual assaults, over 300 reports for physical assaults, and that's a large percentage of that occurring within households. And so this domestic violence bill is making a great allowance so that children can now come forward and report incidents of violence committed against themselves or incidents of violence within the home setting. The bill also makes provision for minors, children under the age of 18, to be dealt with themselves as offenders, because, as discussed in the lower house on Tuesday, a number of the MPs spoke to incidents where young people are perhaps abusing the elderly relatives within the home setting. And so this bill also makes provision for them to be dealt with as offenders, and it makes provision, a strong provision for intervention programs. And one particular avenue of a program is the court diversion program, really dealing with young people at risk, ensuring that their behaviors, their violent tendencies would not escalate and to be an absolute threat within the society. We also heard in the lower house from the Minister for Equity, Honorable Joachim Henry. He indicated that $30 million is expended by the state annually to maintain public assistance, and 500 seniors who are abandoned annually. The government is spending $8 million to be able to take care of them. And the minister, in a very impassioned plea, called on all citizens to be introspective and to take a look and see that how, as an individual, that we are contributing to the overall state of violence in the country, saying that families are asking the state to pay for them to care for their elderly relatives. And he's saying that that is a form of abuse. A very, very impassioned plea made by the minister for everyone to be able to ensure that their actions are not contributing to the larger problem that we are facing in the domestic setting when it comes to domestic violence. The domestic violence bill, as you will hear once the sitting commences, has, and which is why it's been touted as being so progressive in the region, it has now expanded the definition of what what domestic violence looks like. The Minister, Honorable Virginia Albert Poyot, in the lower house indicated that it is a very significant step towards combating crime in the society, and that the bill is making strong provisions for the training of police officers, the training for healthcare providers, social service providers, officers as well. So it is also making a provision for the sort of social support being provided by the state to victims and perpetrators. It speaks more forcefully on protection orders, conditions of bail, the conduct of court proceedings, and the bill, it has been said, will have absolutely no tolerance for violence in the home, breach of a protection order, and ensuring that the persons who are offenders of this will be dealt with quite seriously. The act is now going to replace, once enacted, the bill rather, once enacted, is going to be replacing the 27-year-old Domestic Violence Proceedings Act. And as I indicated, it is said to be progressive, and for the reasons that it has been able to expand it. It is now so inclusive. It is making provisions for groups within the society who are vulnerable. And you will hear during the sitting that it is a bill that does not speak solely to women, but it also speaks to the plight of men who believe that they are being afflicted, those who are experiencing domestic violence, that the bill also provides protection for men. And as indicated, children themselves now can come forward, and the bill makes provision for them to be able to come forward and report themselves incidents of domestic violence. So the bill, as I said, has expanded the definition. We're looking at abuse, and under the bill, abuse includes stalking, and whether that be a cyber stalking or physical stalking. It also speaks to the withholding of financial support, that sort of economic abuse, and it speaks to harassment and coercion. On average, in St. Lucia, 3 women per year die at the hands of their intimate partners, and this bill is looking to be able to prevent such very gruesome and ghastly incidents from occurring in the society. And so it has a robust and coordinated approach to the prevention of domestic violence as well as the prosecution. We can see that the sergeant-at-arms is getting ready, and we may be just moments away from seeing the entrance there of the President of the Senate, Honorable Stanley Felix. Seated, we can see the Leader of Government Business, Honorable Gideon Ferdinand. Next to him, Honorable Senator Prosper, Honorable Senator Lisa Girahir, Honorable Senator Deshawn Mine, Honorable Senator Alvina Reynolds, Independent Senators, Honorable Dale Lee, as well as Honorable Aziz.
Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone King reigns and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thine unworthy servants here gathered here together, in thy name do mostly humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and to guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we have in thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial afflictions, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, and the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and the tranquility of St. Lucia, and the united and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forevermore. Amen and amen.
Good morning, Senators. By way of announcement, I have received correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the following bills were passed in the House and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2021-2022. Supplementary appropriation. Domestic violence, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Agreement Amendment, Customs Control and Management Amendment, Community Tourism Development, Agriculture and Fisheries Incentives Amendments, Also, please permit me, on behalf of the Senate and on behalf of the Parliament in general, I would like to extend my sincere condolences to the family and friends of Constable Nathan Timmet and the entire Royal St. Lucia Police Force, and a speedy recovery to Officer King. In this regard, may I just ask that we stand for a minute of silence. I thank you. Let me take the opportunity at this point to extend belated International Women's Day greetings to all women of St. Lucia, specifically and in general, all women the world over. Senators, the British High Commission, in collaboration with the Parliament of St. Lucia, will be hosting a seminar on Friday, March 11th to highlight Commonwealth Day under the theme, Increasing Women's Political Participation in St. Lucia, a Parliamentary Perspective. The discussion will commence at 9 a.m. and will be streamed live on NTN. Ms. Abrak Sati, who is a researcher from the Swedish Research Council, is currently in the process of conducting interviews for a research project on the subject Larger Lessons from Small Cases, Understanding Democracy in its Everyday Practice in Small Island Nations. Parliamentarians will be interviewed, I know I have, during the period March 7th to 18th, 2022, and this research project aims to increase the understanding of the political system of small island nations work in the everyday practice. Further, on the occasion of International Women's Day, the Parliament of St. Lucia is pleased to announce its partnership with Parl-Americas and Caribbean Women in Leadership to host the next Young Women in Leadership initiative. St. Lucia will be the third Caribbean Parliament to host such an initiative, joining the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and the Parliament of Antigua and Barbuda. Young Women in Leadership is a training program designed to support young women aged 18 to 25 in building the knowledge, skills, and networks needed to positively impact their community and country, with a focus on parliamentary engagement and promoting gender equality, inclusion, and respect for human rights. Activities will take place virtually and in person throughout May and June 2022, including training sessions on transformational leadership, gender equality, and parliamentary procedure. The initiative will culminate in special, all-women simulated parliamentary sittings of the House and Senate at the end of June, with program participants serving as parliamentarians and parliamentary staff in sessions focused on a gender equality theme. Applications are being sought from passionate and dedicated young women between the ages of 18 to 25, residing in St. Lucia, who are interested in public leadership, gender equality, and human rights, and are excited about opportunities for personal growth and development. No previous experience is required, and there is no cost to participate for selected applicants. The application process is open from March 8th to April 8th, 2022. Further information on the program will be shared by Parliament via email. Statements from ministers. Papers to be laid. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, members. Mr. President, before I proceed, may I beg your leave to join you in extending condolences to the family of Officer Timet and the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, as well as well wishes to Officer King and his speedy recovery. I also join the Senate and all St. Lucians in extending continued wishes of International Women's Day, Women's Week, Women's Month to all our women in this country, in this Senate, and by extension, the entire world. And I wish them all the best as they continue to celebrate women. I join them in doing so. I can also see that I'm one of the gender champions representing our Senate, and I'm proud to do so on behalf of our men, but in honor of our women. Mr. President, now I would beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 10 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly, Number 2 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 11 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Physical Distancing Number 2 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 12 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Approval of Test for COVID-19 and Designation of Laboratory Order. Statutory Instrument Number 13 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Testing and Quarantine Order. Statutory Instrument Number 14 of 2022, Price Control Amendment Number 2 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 15 of 2022, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 1, of Schedule 1 Number 2 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 16 of 2022, Value Added Tax, Resolution of Parliament to approve Draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 17 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Physical Distancing Number 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 18 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly Number 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 19 of 2022, Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 20 of 2022, Appointment of the National Export Council Order. St. Lucia Financial Services Regulatory Authority Annual Report will be tabled here, Mr. President. And Supplementary Estimates of Revenue of Expenditure 2021-2022.
Bills. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Supplementary Appropriation.
Supplementary Appropriation.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order Number 49-2 to allow this bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Order number 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of their opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise before this Honorable Senate to present the first reading, the first supplementary budget for the fiscal year 2021-2022, and to table the corresponding supplementary appropriations as required by the Public Finance Management Act number 14 of 2020. Mr. President, the Public Finance Management Act is the authority by which the provisions for the administration of public finance management are established. And the Act covers a number of functions of public finance management. And these include the preparation of the budget, the approval of the estimates of revenue, and the expenditure and approval of the appropriations bill. Mr. President, Section 79(3) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, requires that the preparation of a supplementary estimate, and this is further supported by Section 34 of the Public PFM Act. Section 34 of the PFM Act requires that the minister with responsibility for finance shall cause to be prepared and laid before the House of Assembly supplementary estimates in a form to be determined by the minister. Now, Mr. President, the provision of the supplementary estimates is to cater for expenditure that was not accommodated in the appropriations law, whether it be due to natural or unforeseen events. For example, the hurricane that we will refer to shortly. Or expenditure due to price and tariff increases. So, Mr. President, the PFM Act requires that a supplementary appropriation bill be introduced before the House with explanatory notes, which include the proposed amendments to the appropriation law and other changes to the appropriation law through reallocation. Mr. President, the proposal before this Honorable Senate seeks to increase the government's budgetary spending by approximately $9.87 million for the current fiscal year, and for additional amounts to be paid and appropriated out of the general revenue and funds of the state. The supplementary budget therefore increases the overall expenditure authority to $1,648,471,300 for the current fiscal year. Now, it is to be noted, Mr. President, that this increased allocation is only on recurrent expenditure, as capital expenditure remains at the level that the original budgeted amounts were allocated between these projects. So, Mr. President, subsequent to the approval of the Appropriations Act number 2 of May 10th, 2021, a number of expenses have incurred which were not appropriated, and as a result not included in the total, in that appropriations total that I just gave, the 1.6 billion. You may recall, Mr. President, that St. Lucia was impacted by Hurricane Elsa, and that is an example of an unforeseen circumstance, a natural disaster. And rightfully so, that Category 1 hurricane was in July 2021. In addition to the economic loss to the tourism and agricultural sector, this hurricane, Elsa, caused damage to both private homes, public and corporate buildings on the island, and we remember the panic at the time, especially since it was close to a general election. And at that time, the damage was estimated to be in the region of about 12.5 million US dollars. So, Mr. President, after the assessment of the damage caused by the hurricane, the government at the time announced a response package, and on July 12, 2021, valued that package at $10 million. And these funds, which were expended in 2021, now remain to be appropriately reflected, in the budgeted authority granted by the Parliament for the various government ministries, departments, and agencies who have spent the money. Just to give you a quick rundown of how these funds were distributed based on different departments. In the Ministry of Agriculture, 5 million, Ministry of Infrastructure, Cleanup and Restoration, roads and so on, 1 million, Ministry of Equity, Social Justice, Local Government and Empowerment, 3 million to support households who that had sustained damages, Department of Housing, 1 million to repair damages to the CDC apartments on Jeremy Street. So, Mr. President, there was spending. And while the spending was probably justified, there was a response to a natural disaster. But the process has to be corrected. And so this administration has decided that these recurrent revenues that were that had to cover the additional expenses in that the 2021-2022 budget was framed within the context of a significant financing gap. And I don't think that we don't have to pick up on it now, Mr. President, we do. And as such, an alternative funding mechanism had to be sought. Therefore, Mr. President, the National Economic Fund was considered, and a sum of 10 million was approved, which was later utilized to capitalize the contingencies fund, to cater for unforeseen events such as Hurricane Elsa. Mr. President, such an addition incurred in the fiscal year and was financed primarily by domestic revenues made available from the contingencies fund. Now, these funds were advanced to the various departments by way of contingency funded warrants as per Section 16 of the PFA, and a total of 4 contingency fund warrants amounting to $10 million were issued by the former Minister for Finance for the purposes described above. It was noted, and it should be, Mr. President, that where such advances are made from the contingencies fund, not only there is a requirement to replenish the fund pursuant to the PFM Act, but also Parliament's approval is necessary to authorize the supplementary estimates. And this is essentially why we are here today, Mr. President. To date, a total of $9,870,400, which represents 98.7% of the capital receipts from the contingencies funds account, was utilized to finance various supplementary amounts required for the fiscal year 2021-2022. Now, the expenditure was primarily of a recurrent nature, and again, just to give you an idea, Mr. President, of some of the areas that it was spent in, about 4.9 million was spent on the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Natural Resources. About 1 million, Department of Housing, as I mentioned. Close to $1,939,273 was spent by the Department of Transport, Infrastructure, Port Authorities, clearing out gutters, drains, culverts, drenching rivers, and so on. And about 3 million was utilized by the Department of Equity. So, Mr. President, we recognize that these funds needed to be spent and were spent. But as is required, we have to come here to ensure that the due process is followed and we do it properly. And so, as indicated, Mr. President, the circumstances leading to the request for additional resources, though not unusual, were unforeseen and unavoidable. We accept that. Therefore, the expenditure incurred were necessary to assist the situation at the time, but the government's intervention had to provide urgent assistance. To defer this expenditure, Mr. President, would have been detrimental and to the very people who we are here to serve. And for this reason, I submit for the consideration and approval of this Honorable Senate the supplementary estimates of the sums required to replenish the contingencies fund along with explanations of the amendments made to the Appropriations Act No. 2 of 2021 through reallocation approved by the Minister for Finance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the question. Senator Fede, I have not. I think you jump in the gun a little bit. Senators, the question is that the supplementary appropriation bill be read a second time. Senator Fede.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to offer up a few comments on the amendment to this appropriation bill. I remember the events that have led us here. When the Hurricane Elsa struck, Mr. President, our farmers felt the brunt of it because the hurricane came with a lot of wind. And it meant that farmers in communities like Roseau, like Techimet, like other parts of Millet, and other parts of the island, Mr. President, did indeed endure severe damages. And now I realize that in the request, the allocations have about 4.9, almost 5 million to agriculture. So I want to register on record that I do support this initiative to go towards our farmers. Another thing that happened, we saw in some of the highland areas, was the fact that many families in areas like Belvedere and Canaries and some other parts of the island, they suffered severe damages to their roof. And so, Mr. President, up until this day, some of those families are still without the necessary assistance to get their roof repaired. In fact, a lot of them have suffered severe damages to losing a lot of their household furniture, clothing, and other personal items. I remember visiting one mother in Belvedere, and she had 2 children, and nothing in the house, Mr. President, was good because the wrath of the hurricane was so severe that it did cause this family untold disruption to their lives. So it brings into question the need for us to be a lot quicker and a lot more prompt in terms of disaster response. While I'm happy that the request is coming before the Parliament to get the necessary buy-in so that we can approve the additional funds, I'm not happy that there are still so many families without help because of this. You would remember, Mr. President, that the CIP, in Central Castries, a territory that you're familiar with, the CDC buildings would have lost its roof. And we had to act very promptly to get this into gear so that we can restructure and reorganize and refurbish the roof of the CDC so that we can bring some comfort to the residents there. The leader of government business today has indicated that these monies are coming from the National Economic Fund, of which I'm aware, as of June of last year, would have had a total of over $31 million. In fact, when this new regime came into power following the elections, they would have met over $30 million. We had a big debate in the parliament over the use and what the National Economic Fund should be used for. I was actually taken to task when I suggested that it appears as if the present government was coming to make the adjustment so that cabinet can have the final decision on who are the people that are going to make the final decision, removing the power from the board of the National Economic Fund and tasking that power into the hands of the cabinet. Why I'm raising this, Mr. President? We are seeing exactly why it is necessary for countries to have a wet day fund. We're seeing exactly why countries have to ensure that the necessary fiscal discipline and the planning and forward thinking, so that in the event that we have a hurricane like Elsa, that you can respond promptly. And such was the thinking behind our financial management over the affairs of this country. We sought to ensure that there is the necessary provisions made so that you don't go spending and blasting everything, but you make monies available. But what this act also does, what the statement by the leader of government business has done here today, it has debunked all suggestions by the current government that the United Workers' Party administration left the coffers empty. Now, if that was the case, you would have not had $10 million to find overnight to go and take it from the National Economic Fund. It took years of building up the fund, Mr. President, through the returns from the CIP program. And you would note that our policy is we should not use this for recurrent, but we should use this for important capital expenditure programs. And as well, Mr. President, in times of disaster, in unforeseen circumstances. So I'm very, very happy that the leader of government business today has said to the country that there was monies in a fund that his administration was able to tap into so that we can now fund the amendment necessary.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I'm addressing Mr. President. Mr. President, the leader of opposition business has just made an erroneous statement, and I think that...
Could you clarify?
Yes, he has said that I stood and said that we found monies that we were able to spend, and based on the statement that I made, I am here to get the process right for monies that have been spent. We didn't find any fund that we spent any money in as a government. These monies were spent by the former government. We are coming to right the wrong in this case, but I have never made any statement this morning to suggest that the Labour Party came in and found any monies that we were able to spend. I have come to this Honourable House on behalf of the Senate to get the appropriations through the process that it ought to have been. So to say that monies were found that we've spent is misleading, and the leader of opposition business, if this is where he's going, needs to withdraw and stay away from that argument.
Fellow Senator Fede, unless you can show us where it is that the leader of government business had uttered the words or said what you claim that he had said, I think the honorable thing to do would be to withdraw that, because I don't think that you can.
Mr. President, I am quoting the leader of government business own opening statement. And I would like to ask him a question. Where are we financing and how are we able to find the extra $10 million? Because we're going over $1.6 million budgeted. He has stated clearly that the monies are coming from the National Economic Fund. I sat here and I listened to you, and that's what you said. So please clarify, where did the money come from? Please reaffirm that it has come from the National Economic Fund.
Senator Feder, you will direct your questions to me, not to the Honorable Minister. You come through me, you don't go directly to him, right? I think he has clarified that, so you may continue.
So here we are, Mr. President, where it is stated very clearly that the monies are coming from the National Economic Fund. And this is for the viewers that are listening to this. This is the CIP monies that we have raised and we've placed into that fund. As of June, there were $30 million. And if I can take you further, this administration, in fact, while we were here late last year, Mr. President, we came here to amend the National Economic Fund legislation so that Cabinet can make the final decision on how are we going to spend monies on the National Economic Fund. So there's a consistent trend of argument as we come through this House showing that there are monies. I remember, Mr. President, you and I were in a back and forth when I suggested that it appeared as if the National Economic Fund was being used for a STEP program for Christmas. I did say that. And the leader of government business at that time raised objections. So I'm being very consistent in what I'm saying. And at that time, there was never the objection that there were $30 million in that fund. So there are monies, contrary to the suggestion by the St. Lucia Labour Party, which they came and found, which we left. And this is because, Mr. President, of prudent management of the finances of this country. Now, this is an appropriation bill that this administration has brought to the House. And, there are times that governments may have to do something because the government doesn't stop because there was an election. One government may commence a specific program, and then another government may have to come and complete the process. It happens all the time. We will have the first budget of this administration very, very soon. And we will be able to, in this book called The Social Economic Review, where it will reveal the truth about debt in this country. And at the appropriate time, we will be able to show that there have been a lot of reckless and false statements made about the management of the finances of that country. But the debate is not that today.
Senator Feder, could you confine your presentation to the subject matter at hand? You were straying. I've given you a little leeway, but you are straying a little bit too much now. So could you confine your presentation to the supplementary appropriation?
No problems at all, Mr. President. So I'm calling again, Mr. President, so that the people who have lost their roofs can get the necessary assistance needed. And let it be, Mr. President, that while we were going around, we didn't look at Labour Party supporters and UWP supporters. We actually had NEMO and the social transformation people went ahead and they did a comprehensive surveying of the people that had the damages. Those damages were assessed. We went through the farmers. We didn't look at whether they were Labour Party supporters or whether they were United Workers' Party supporters. What we did, Mr. President, is that we went through the full list of farmers across St. Lucia that suffered significant damages, and we gave the assistance where necessary so that those individuals can get the relief that is necessary. Mr. President, I think on the issue of making sure we have the appropriate resources for climate change, this is one such occasion where it tells us very clearly that we need to continue to plan and don't be reactionary in our attitude to spending and saving and making sure that we make the necessary provisions for climate change. Because, Mr. President, this is still a real and present danger that continues to loom over the heads of all small island developing states like ours. And so what we have to do, Mr. President, is take example from this appropriation today and to see a bigger purpose in what obtains here today by the fact that we need to do what is the disciplinary thing and ensure that we make allowances at all times so that we can respond very quickly. Mr. President, the reason why we have always ensured that we kept a national economic fund is for exactly a purpose like this. Because when you try to mobilize financing in the international fora and you try to go into the World Bank, and we've had examples, is that by the time you do draw down on the money, the people continue to suffer while you're going through the bureaucracy of the IFIs. So it becomes absolutely crucial that we plan for this so that we have the flexibility of, in a timely fashion, going in and tapping into funds that we would have built up ourselves. And so I hope that in this very simple exercise that we can find a grander and bigger purpose. Mr. President, I thank you very much.
Senators, the question is that the supplementary appropriation bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide
The leader of government business.
Mr. President, I wish to, this is a money bill, and I wish to move that the supplementary appropriation not commit to committee stage, understanding Order 65, and that the bill be read. But before I actually put it, I just want to correct one issue that was raised by the leader of opposition business, and I could not sit here and allow this to go through. It happened in a previous chamber, and it was corrected, and it was attempted again today, and I will correct it. On the matter of the use of the funds based on equitable means, we have, at that time, Mr. President, we had 6 opposition members in this honorable house, 6 of them. And they have all reported over and over that not one of them was able to tap into or benefit when that was being done. So I couldn't have moved on this morning had I not corrected that misleading statement again by the leader of opposition business. So, Mr. President, having said that, I move that the supplementary appropriation not commit to committee stage, understanding Order 65, and that the appropriation bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the supplementary appropriation bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2021-2022.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move for first reading a bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence.
Domestic violence.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg that Standing Order 49-2 be suspended to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Senators, the question is that Standing Orders 49-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Leader of Government Business to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many ayes are of that opinion, say aye. As many ayes are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. You may proceed, Honorable Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence. Earlier on, Mr. President, we all extended best wishes to our women, and at that time the colleague senator, opposition senator, the only female on the opposition side, was not yet in the chamber, so I do extend the same to her and all our other colleagues. Mr. President, this bill, Domestic Violence Bill, is perhaps one of the most progressive pieces of legislation that our country and our region would have seen in a very long time. And every time there is progressive legislation, it signals an intention to grow and to change. And it's not always very easy to deal with, but you have to be courageous to do such. And so, as we deliberate on this bill today, I will try to be concise to allow for more treatment to be made by the women in this honorable House. And so I will provide a very broad context, and I'm sure that our honorable senators, particularly the women, will give proper treatment to this bill. But Mr. President, I just want to bring to focus a few salient issues that would have led to this bill being tabled today, and also the context within which, as a developing country, we are tabling this bill in this Senate. Mr. President, St. Lucia does not exist in a vacuum, and in the Caribbean, we have to be in line with certain expectations internationally, regionally, particularly along the lines of human rights, equity, equality, fairness, and gender equity, gender-based issues fall in line with those. I remember as a student being male and doing a first degree and deciding to do some research on a matter relating to gender equity in administrative practices. Some of my colleagues, male colleagues, suggested that I should leave that for the ladies to do. Why am I fighting the cause for ladies? I wasn't doing that, Mr. President. I think I was just maybe a little bit ahead of my time and recognized that there are certain things that we do, perhaps subconsciously, that we do not realize can really affect others, particularly the opposite sex. Mr. President, this bill was, in my view, a bill that should have been passed a long time ago, and it was in the making. As we heard from the presenter of the bill, the minister responsible for gender relations, was at the doorstep of the previous administration, 6 years almost, went on 5 years plus, and it didn't come through. But we have decided within the first 8 months of this administration that we, the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, standing on a very solid foundation of strong women and determined men who are prepared to lead along with these women, have decided that this bill must be tabled. And so I'm very proud today, with the support of all these, the women in this house. I might stand alone as the men, but I feel very, very honored to be part of this historic moment. So, Mr. President, let me just try to outline some of the benefits and some of the contextual issues that make this bill a very powerful and useful move. We have to be very careful that as we proceed, Mr. President, that this bill not only highlights domestic issues relating to couples and people in intimate relationships. I've always been a very strong advocate of the less fortunate and vulnerable. And domestic, I think, is a very key term in this bill. And this is where we must keep our focus. Because domestic would include a household. And in a household, you have men, generally, women, elderly, children, persons with disabilities, and a whole mix of different types of personalities. And once you have people who are vulnerable, this domestic violence bill seeks to address and protect them. And that is where the value of this bill is. Mr. President, the theme for International Women's Day was very appropriate and captured some of the essence of this bill as well. Now, we usually focus on the issue of violence among persons in relationships, particularly against women. And as a man, I could tell you, Mr. President, that perhaps some of us, as men, may not be as vocal and speak about instances. But let's just say there may be men who will benefit from this bill as well, because the legislation that we are about to pass will address issues that perhaps give men and others an avenue to air their voices. Mr. President, the issue of safe spaces is one of the areas that this bill will also address. I believe that the home, again, domestic is the focus. The home is supposed to be a safe space. It's supposed to be a place where everyone who occupies that space must feel comfortable, they must feel safe, they must feel protected. And once these various attributes are present, then the home is really a home. And when I say safe, protected, it has to be so for every occupant of the household. Men, women, children, elderly, vulnerable. This bill, Mr. President, also makes provisions for threats. And I think sometimes we underestimate the intention of someone to cause harm or to cause distress to someone else. And we tend to be reactive and wait until something has happened to deal with it. But this bill also makes reference to threats. And if I can just mention under section 4, under 4.3 in this bill, it speaks to averting and preventing domestic violence before it happens. And I think there's a bit of proactivity in this, the intent, and I think this is something I can appreciate. And it says that the police must ensure. The police, the bill under section 4.3 states, Mr. President, that if there is a report, that the police must, the operative word there is must, report or respond to every report. It doesn't say may, it says must. And I think it signals an intent. Mr. President, minors and children are captured in Clause 7, and there are certain loopholes that this piece of legislation will help to eliminate, particularly when it comes to perpetrators of violence who tend to get away. Mr. President, it is clear that domestic violence is violence, and violence usually can be linked to criminal activity. And we can all agree that in our current environment, we would want to get a hand on issues that contribute to any kind of criminal activity. And I think this bill also seeks to do that. I believe, Mr. President, that the bill links our legislation to existing legislation that deals with criminal activity. And we need as a country to develop a culture of non-tolerance for any form of violence against any group, whether it is women, children, or anyone else. And so I believe, Mr. President, that this bill is very timely and addresses a number of issues that make certain actions that probably used to be viewed as trivial, makes them serious and criminal, and allows for the law to be able to protect those who would have been on the receiving end. Mr. President, as any other bill or legislation, I also believe that this domestic violence bill must be accompanied by sensitization and education. It will not happen in this honorable house in one shot, because we are legislators and we will legislate. But along with this legislation, Mr. President, we must be prepared to sensitize and educate, because there are lots of misconceptions, stereotypes, and fallacies that are associated with gender, with women, with men. Boys must not cry. Girls, little girls are made of, what is it? Sugar and spice, and all that's nice. And boys are this. All of those mindsets about the different genders, Mr. President. As we go through with this type of legislation, we must re-educate our people to be able to embrace reality and not those, I don't know where they came from, but there are certain stereotypes that we must get rid of to allow us to be able to give proper treatment to that type of legislation. So, Mr. President, this bill doesn't come in isolation. And I call on all of us in the Senate, St. Lucians, and all of us who have an interest in the safety, comfort, and well-being of our loved ones to be open-minded and prepared to embrace a new way of thinking when we address issues of violence against women and against any other group. Mr. President, I need to say also that sometimes we, in our own way, not necessarily intentionally, but in our actions, we can be it's very easy for us to discriminate. And I think when it comes to children, I have a particular, maybe because of my background, I have a particular interest in how any piece of legislation affects them. And we will all agree in this honorable house that in our society, fortunately or unfortunately, women tend to be the ones who provide a lot of the nurturing and upbringing and the direct interaction with our children. I hope that this changes, but I believe that what this bill does, it also tries to put all children and other victims on a fair and level playing field in terms of the treatment and how the issues are resolved. And I'm hoping that it will also involve both legitimate children and what we may call illegitimate children from married homes, and children who may not have been conceived or brought up in a legitimate quote-unquote environment. And Mr. President, I believe that as we try to deal with this piece of legislation, We may have to come back at some point to make some amendments because, the whole concept of gender and all of these things evolve, and we may have to come back one day and redefine what is male and what is female. And a woman and their own perception of themselves as men as well. We have other connotations. That is a reality we have to face, and we must not run away from it. Even as a man, Mr. President, I have been questioned because I along with Senator Jawahir, gender champions of the parliament. It's as if that is a place for women. And that is one of the misconceptions that we must get away from, because men have a place in this agenda. And I believe that if we adopt that type of attitude, that this bill, with any deficiency it may have from the onset, we should be ready and willing to strengthen it and make sure that it deals with the intention for which it was passed. But I believe at this point, Mr. President, I will have to take my leave and allow a little more balance, gender balance maybe, so that all of our members of this Honorable Senate who wish to contribute will do so. But keeping one thing in mind, that the intention of this bill is to address whatever issues that discriminate or cause harm or can damage or in any way affect persons in a domestic setting, and not particularly any one group or any one person. So, Mr. President, I submit these comments as I present this bill and look forward to a very healthy and engaging discussion.
Senators, the question is that the domestic violence bill be read a second time. Senator Jawahir. Yeah, mine is working. Mine is working. Testing. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Mr. President, under the current circumstances, I move that the House stand suspended for 10 minutes so we can address the minor accident.
Members, honorable members, the question is that the House stands adjourned for 10 minutes to facilitate the resolution of the current issues being faced with the microphones. I now move the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. House stands adjourned for 10 minutes.
Adjournment there quite briefly, just 10 minutes suspension there for the House. Just a little incident, a glass of water being spilled, which would have affected the microphones and the PA system. Just making sure that the issue is resolved so that we can have the PA system working. So we will take a short break and we are going to be back for the sitting of the Senate just within a 10-minute period.